amazing story. The New Jersey Nets are in the NBA Finals.
In 2002, the New Jersey Nets made it to their first ever NBA Finals. After finishing last season with just 26 wins, the Nets won 52 games, held the best record in the Eastern Conference, and were now just 4 wins away from one of the biggest turnarounds in NBA history. But unfortunately for the Nets, their season wouldn't have a fairy tale ending. New Jersey were swept in the finals by Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and the three-peat Los Angeles Lakers. But the very next year, the Nets were back and better than ever. They ran through the East in the playoffs and became back-to-back Eastern Conference champions.
For the second straight year, the New Jersey Nets are going to the finals.
Yet once again in the finals, they fell short, this time to Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs. Back-to-back finals appearances and back-to-back finals defeats. From that point on, the Nets franchise was never really the same, and almost 20 years later, they have still yet to return to the NBA's biggest stage. For the last 10 years, the now Brooklyn Nets have desperately been trying to build a team that will win the franchise's first ever NBA championship. But this desperation has caused Brooklyn to make some bold, brave, and completely bizarre moves that have led to nothing but embarrassment and regret. During the summer of 2012, the Brooklyn Nets were officially back. With a new arena and a new look, the only thing missing was a new star. And it just so happened that a certain Orlando Magic center had already requested a trade. Dwight Howard was available and he wanted to go to Brooklyn, but the Nets simply weren't able to get a deal done.
Sources say that they have turned the page. The Nets have said, hey, look, we had our deadline. That's the best we could do under the circumstances. So now it remains to be seen where Dwight Howard goes, but by all indications, it will not be to the Brooklyn Nets.
Missing out on Howard was bad, but not as bad as the idea of not re-signing point guard Deron Williams. So the Nets sent 5 players and a couple of draft picks to the Atlanta Hawks for 6-time All-Star Joe Johnson. Not only was that enough to convince Williams to stay, but the Nets also got center Brook Lopez to sign on the dotted line. The Brooklyn Nets had one of the highest payrolls in the league, and with that came high expectations with their first season back in New York. However, the 2012-13 season showed that the Nets' expectations were far too high. With a record of 14-14, Brooklyn fired head coach Avery Johnson and replaced him with PJ Carlesimo. While the coaching change was good enough for the Nets to make the playoffs and secure the 4th seed, the Nets would still lose in the first round to an injury-plagued and Derrick Rose-less Chicago Bulls team. If that wasn't bad enough, Brooklyn's big summer acquisition went from ISO Joe to Ice Cold Joe. Johnson scored only 6 points in Game 7, averaged under 15 points per game, and shot a disappointing 42% from the field and 26% from 3. On top of that, the Nets still owed Johnson $90 million over the course of the next 4 seasons. Yet somehow, that wasn't quite as bad as the draft night disaster of 2013. One of the worst trades in NBA history saw the Brooklyn Nets get a 36-year-old Jason Terry, a 36-year-old Paul Pierce, and a 37-year-old Kevin Garnett. Meanwhile, the Boston Celtics received 5 players, a 2014 first-round pick, a 2016 first-round pick, aka 3rd overall pick Jaylen Brown, and the ability to swap first-round picks in 2017, which turned into, oh by the way, the 3rd overall pick Jason Tatum. To make things even more interesting, the Nets gave former player Jason Kidd his first ever head coaching job, pairing a rookie head coach with a squad filled of aging veterans. Once again, Brooklyn's expectations were sky high, but in reality, the best thing the Nets got out of this deal was a 2014 second round playoff exit to the Miami Heat.
Brooklyn home.
Ultimately, they only got a half a season out of Terry before he was traded to the Sacramento Kings, 1 full season out of Pierce before he left in free agency to join the Washington Wizards, and a season and a half out of Garnett before he was sent back to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Eventually, both Deron Williams and Joe Johnson were bought out of their contracts, Billy King was no longer general manager, and the Brooklyn Nets became one of the worst teams in the NBA. But their tough times would not last long.
1, 2, 3. I'm coming home, coming home. Tell the world that I'm coming.
On June 30th, 2019, the Brooklyn Nets signed free agent Kyrie Irving and completed a sign-and trade for Kevin Durant. Both players were coming off injuries, especially KD, who was recovering from a torn Achilles. But once the two stepped out on the court together, the Nets looked like they were going to be a serious problem for the rest of the league. However, the Nets made a grave mistake. They put all their faith and all their trust solely on their two-star shoulders, showering both KD and Kyrie with whatever or whoever they wanted. And unfortunately for them, they were embarrassingly swept out of the first round last season by Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and the Boston Celtics. Ironically enough, so far, the best that Brooklyn has gotten out of having both KD and Kyrie on their team is a second round playoff exit. And the Nets can make every excuse for why things haven't worked out. But the bottom line is this: the Brooklyn Nets have failed. But if they surround their two stars with a healthy team that avoids distractions and just focuses and plays basketball, then the Nets can still win a championship. But if they don't, this Nets franchise will continue to be nothing more than a desperate mess.